Purpose of this press conference is to provide preliminary information on an officer-involved shooting that took place early this morning at Lucky Lil's Casino located at 15th and Grand. To reiterate, this is preliminary information and will be updated as necessary. At approximately 12:45 a.m., officers were dispatched to a residence in the 1800 block of Yellowstone in regards to an ongoing domestic situation. The female caller reported that her ex-husband, a 44-year-old male, was at her house causing a disturbance by knocking on windows, doors, and possibly waving a handgun in the air. Suspect was yelling things and at one point made some comment about going to rob a casino. Officers knew the suspect from past dealings and that there was an active temporary restraining order that needed to be served. Additionally, shift briefings noted that extra patrol was needed at the Yellowstone address. Officers arrived in the area and found that the suspect had left. Officers began to search for the suspect and ultimately found him walking in the parking lot of Lucky Lil's Casino. The first arriving officer called to the suspect and ordered him to stop. The suspect ignored the officer and went to the front door of the casino. Lucky Lil's uses a buzz-in system for after hours for increased security. He was buzzed in by staff. Upon entering, the suspect walked to the north end of the business, which is closest to Grand Avenue, pulled out a handgun and began to wave it and threaten people. At this point, arriving officers attempted to enter, but they could not get the staff's attention and were not immediately buzzed in. Officers broke a window on the front door, and two entered the casino and took a position behind the interior entry doors. Others moved to secure other exits from the outside of the building. Once inside, the officers saw the suspect waving the gun and threatening people. Patrons were yelling, screaming, ducking for cover, or looking to escape. I don't know exactly how many were in the casino at the time. I've heard the number 7, but I can't confirm that right now. The officer posted at the door and ordered the suspect to drop the weapon. The suspect failed to comply and yelled at one point that he had hostages. The officer, believing lives were in jeopardy, fired multiple rounds from his patrol rifle. I don't know exactly how many rounds were fired, but it was more than a single shot. He struck the suspect in the torso, caused him to drop the gun and go partially down. The suspect, who was in a crouch or on all fours, began to reach for something on the floor. Believing that it was the handgun, the officer fired again and downed the suspect. Officers immediately made entry and rendered first aid until medical units arrived. The suspect was transported to St. V's, where he was pronounced dead. No officers or civilians were injured. An initial search of the casino revealed that the suspect was armed with a CO2 pistol and that it was located on the floor near where he fell. The deceased is a 44-year-old male white. He's a Billings resident. He is known to the police department, and his identity will be withheld until notifications are made by the coroner. The officer involved is 11-year veteran Sergeant Brett Becker, B-E-C-K-E-R. Our investigators will handle this investigation in conjunction with oversight from Department of Criminal Investigations, from Department of Justice, and our County Attorney's Office. Pursuant to policy, Sergeant Becker was placed on administrative leave pending investigation by our detectives. Additionally, there will be an independent review and oversight by the Office of Professional Standards. There will be a critical incident debriefing for all involved officers, dispatch, medical personnel at a later date, and Sergeant Becker will meet with a mental health professional before returning to duty. All of these actions are required by policy. And with that, I will answer your questions.
Were there any signs that you're aware of that this man might have been under the influence of anything while he was doing all of this?
Secondhand information only that he may have been on some sort of opiate, but we can't confirm that. Obviously, the autopsy will include a toxicology report, and we can definitively say whether that was accurate or not, or if something else was on board.
Say what the secondhand, what the source of that is?
Would be the ex-wife.
Was she in the casino?
Who's that?
The ex-wife.
No, she was at her house in the 1800 block of Yellowstone.
Okay. A CO2 pistol, like a pellet gun?
Correct.
Was it, did he use it, or was it loaded?
That I don't know.
And had he fired it at all?
That I don't know.
So we had a officer-involved shooting yesterday. I was going to ask if the meth problem has been playing into these scenarios, but it doesn't sound like with this one.
Well, it's possible. Again, we won't know until we get toxicology of what, if anything, these individuals had in their system. What is consistent, however, is you have individuals who fail to obey a lawful order of a police officer in both situations, and then it escalates. We have erratic behavior, so we do have some common denominators on this. So, again, toxicology report will give us a piece of the puzzle, but until that gets done, I can't speak definitively to that.
When and where will the autopsy be?
When is determined by the coroner and our forensic ME up at the hospital. Where they have a morgue up here, and when that could be within days. Generally, they have autopsies within a day or two of a death.
Is there any video of it?
I don't know if there is or not. If you're talking body cameras or anything like that, we didn't have body cameras on the officers. Casinos routinely have videos of the interior, and we'll certainly be looking for their in-business video.
You said that the suspect was waving a gun around. Was he pointing it at people when he was seen?
Correct.
Did he point at the officer at any point?
Did not have indication he pointed at the officers.
So you said the officer felt that other patients' lives were in danger?
Correct.
Was the man asking for money at the casino?
No.
Was he asking for, sorry, Mr. Veritop, was he robbing the casino?
He was not. Not that we know of. He allegedly made a statement prior to leaving his ex's residence on Yellowstone that he was going to go rob a casino, but we don't have any information that when he went in he was demanding money or approached a till or approached any one of the servers, anything of that sort.
During yesterday's incident, it sounded like there was multiple attempts to use a taser. Do you feel that the officers had that same window to use a taser today instead of the duty rifle?
Well, number one, you have to understand that a taser is a less lethal option for officers, and it's not an appropriate tool when you are in a deadly force situation. And so in this particular case, we have an individual who has entered a building, who is waving a gun, who is threatening people, and who is failing to comply with orders. The other thing to consider is the distance, where if you're familiar with Lucky Lil's, prior to that it was the Mustard Seed restaurant. So if you haven't gambled, you probably had some food there. But it is, from one end of the building to the other, is a lot longer than the capability of our tasers. And so that would not have been an appropriate tool in that particular situation under those circumstances.
Chief, there's been several officer-involved shootings within the past year. Why do you think non-fatal tactics aren't working?
Well, when we have the opportunity to deploy, and when we get them to operate as we expect, then they're very effective. I can tell you unequivocally that since we have implemented the use of the taser over the years, it has saved countless lives, both on the offender side and the officers. However, you need to understand that it is a less lethal option, and you do not use a less lethal option in a lethal situation. The situation yesterday had less lethal option under the cover of a lethal option, which is a textbook application of how you're trying to deal with that situation. This incident here does not afford that opportunity to have that. I mean, it rapidly evolves. It's moving quickly. The first time we encounter, he is threatening deadly force to multiple citizens and multiple patrons. So again, you have to take all of that into consideration.
And as we've already mentioned, this is the second shooting involving an officer in 2 days. What kind of impact has this had on the department and its officers?
Well, these are life-changing events for the officers that are involved. Unlike what may be depicted on TV, it's not a badge of honor, anything of that sort. Like I said, it's very traumatic to the officers. It's traumatic to the families. Certainly, it's affecting anybody who we have shot and killed or wounded. It affects that family. I think what it does, it highlights the danger and the unpredictability of this job. And how dangerous it truly is. And those situations are exacerbated of late by the problem we're dealing with methamphetamine. It makes people irrational, it makes them unpredictable, and then, most everybody's have some sort of weapon. And law enforcement is called to deal with those situations. And we try to resolve things peacefully, but when you're dealing with all of those dynamics, sometimes that doesn't happen. And unfortunately, the last couple of days, and again, keep in mind, I don't have a definitive answer on whether or not there's any drugs on board. But obviously, you're talking about irrational behavior where somebody would threaten police officers, threaten citizens. That's not something that clear-thinking people do.
How many people will be on leave as a result of the last 2 shootings? And you're already a little bit short-staffed. Does this hurt you with staff?
Yeah, not too bad on our staffing. We have 2 off from yesterday and 1 off from today.
What other burdens are placed on the police department following this? So are there dedicated officers like IA to investigate, or is it up to detectives in the department to add the officer-involved shootings to their already busy caseload?
Well, our investigations division is handling the criminal side of this. And understand it, basically handling it as a homicide investigation. That's exactly what it is. I also remind people that our officers, in this case the patrons of the bar, are victims of a violent crime. And our officer was put in a position where he had to react. All of our use of deadly forces for that, in this case particular and the one yesterday, parallel investigations by our Office of Professional Standards always takes place. So that is a dedicated command officer that's dealing with the administrative side of things. So it is labor intensive. It does require a lot of resources to bring to bear to do these things properly. But that way we guarantee a thorough, transparent investigation. Ultimately, it will be presented to the county attorney. They decide when it goes to a coroner's inquest. And a county attorney, Twito, has specific requirements as to what that investigation needs to look like before it's brought forward.
From the police side, any idea how long Lucky Will's Casino will be closed to the public?
I don't know. Once our detectives turn the scene over to them, we are effectively done there. There's some damage to some windows that they would have to replace. But other than that, once we give them back the building, then they could be open for business as soon as they deem appropriate.
And how many shots were fired?
Don't know. Multiple, however, but I don't know what multiple is. So the investigation will determine that.
Do you know if he was struck multiple times?
I'm sorry?
Do you know if the man was struck multiple times?
Initially, I've heard at least 2 in the torso, and that's all. Again, I can't confirm that. That's just initial information.
And was it multiple votes? So you shot him multiple times, the guy went down, and then he thought he was reaching something, shot him multiple times again.
Not sure.
Okay.
Not sure.
And the gun, was it did it look like a real gun?
I haven't seen it. In my experience, the CO2 handguns look like a semi-automatic pistol with a magazine. Obviously different models, and I don't know what this looks like in general. My experience, they are a very close facsimile to a real semi-automatic handgun.
And just to be clear, Sergeant Becker thought that he was holding a real gun at the time?
Correct.
Can you talk about this man's history with law enforcement or with crime?
I can at a later date. I don't have that with me. I can just tell you that we knew of this individual. We've had some dealings with him. We've had some previous calls. What they were, what they amounted to, I don't have that information right now, but he was known to law enforcement.
Were there any witnesses that you guys are aware of that spoke with him or interacted with him earlier in the day that might be able to explain his behavior?
I'm not aware of that. That's what the detectives will be following up on, trying to determine what led up to the events that started, primarily at 12:45. Obviously, if, as I indicated in opening remarks, we have an ongoing domestic situation involving a TRO that needs to be issued. So there is some history there, and what that is, I just don't know.
I'm sorry, the TRO, it hadn't been issued yet?
Had not been served yet, and that was part of the reason we were looking for him. Number one, we were responding to this suspicious call, obviously with some troubling behavior, and second, we knew, from speaking to the ex, who it was, and that we had this TRO that needed to be issued. That was some of the information that was on briefing, that we needed to get this issued, and we needed extra patrol at this residence because of the problems that had arisen.
You said at one point he was yelling about taking hostages. You can expand on that at all? Yeah, and again,
Yes. Secondhand information to me, detectives had indicated from the patrons inside as they interviewed them that this is something that somebody heard. They clearly heard the officer giving instructions, and then somebody heard him make this statement. And again, these are all things that the investigators will be sorting out as they do their interviews and contact people and try to piece this together.
So 12:45 is when officers were called when the man was on Yellowstone, right? But what time was it when the shooting took place at the casino?
Shooting took place was at approximately 1:30 in that area. So I had been looking for him for a while. And I don't know if a vehicle's involved, but you're talking 1800 block of Yellowstone to 1500 block of Grand, so a little bit of distance there.
And from what you know of, no connection from today's officer-involved shooting with the suspect and the officer-involved shooting yesterday with that suspect?
Absolutely none.
You mentioned an ongoing drug issue in the community. Looking into the future, what approach do you think the department will take as far as maybe trying to approach these incidents differently, since you're aware that there is a drug problem? I know it's hard to look into the future, but do you think there needs to be a different approach so these officers aren't put in these situations, or?
Well, I mean, dealing with the methamphetamine problem is a whole nother press conference about things. I mean, obviously, we know that it's direct source from Mexico. We know that when it gets up here, there's very little competition. It's almost 100% pure. It's a very, very potent product that people get addicted to. I think that you know that our drug unit makes a significant number of arrests, 56 felony arrests last year. That doesn't count what our patrol gets into. The Highway Patrol has deployed an interdiction team here to help stem the tide of this thing. And so enforcement at the manufacturer, at the producer, at the distribution level, we work very hard. The other side of that is we need to get after the users. And now you're getting into social services, you're getting into mental health, you're getting into medical stuff. And that's not our deal, but it's all tied together. So if we can, eliminate supply, eliminate demand, then hopefully we won't have these problems. But we're on an interstate, close to, on 90, close to 94. You have stuff coming and going, and we know that. So the other part of your question is, are we going to change how we deal with people who are presumed on methamphetamine? We're called to these situations. Okay, I mean, people are calling for us because somebody's causing an issue. And we just cannot walk away from it. We have to deal with it one way, shape, or form. We do the very best we can to mitigate stuff, to handle things peaceably. We have a great number of our officers who are trained in what we call crisis intervention training. Primarily, it's for dealing with the mentally ill. So we don't get into situations that have happened in the past in other parts of the country. That being said, as I told you before, you're dealing with people that are erratic. They are unpredictable. They are paranoid. They are armed. And we're trying to control that situation. And so short of walking away if we anticipate problems, we're going to do the very best we can. And understand that these people are putting our officers and the citizens at risk by their actions, and we're the ones that are called to solve that problem. And unfortunately, again, if it's correlated, and that's coming in the talk screen later, we weren't able to do that peacefully this time, but that was somebody else's choice.
Did you say it was the ex-wife who had said he made a remark that he was going out to rob a casino?
Correct, and that was, she's inside, he's outside, and, whatever she heard from, through closed doors, so. That's the information that we had.
He was outside her house.
Correct, yeah, the call started out as a disturbance with him being there, knocking on doors, knocking on windows, yelling and screaming, and at some point in time, she relayed to responding officer that he made that comment.
Prior to actually showing up at the casino?
Correct.
Exactly how many officers were dispatched to Yellowstone and then to the casino?
Well, generally we send a minimum of 2 to a call. I don't know if more responded to Yellowstone specifically. If people were not busy at that particular time, I know for a fact that other cars would be in the area. And then once it was broadcast that they had him located at the casino, the majority of the night shift responded there. Once the shooting took place, that of course tied up a significant number of resources, resulting in us calling in day shift early.
So officers needed to break through a door to get in, correct?
That is correct. They actually broke there's a window panes in the door. They broke one pane, crawled through that and then got inside. So they didn't break the door open. It was just to gain access. And this was because they couldn't get buzzed in.
Why weren't they getting buzzed in? Was it because they put the order?
Yeah, I purely conjecture on my part. I would assume that staff's attention was directed to this individual who was waving a gun and threatening people. Because if you're familiar with that building, the front door's on the southeast corner, and this individual had made his way to the far north end, which is closer to Grand Avenue. So you're almost 180 degrees, and if I'm not looking at the door, looking at the screen, then I probably missed it. Conjecture on my part. I don't think that they intentionally left the police outside with this guy waving a gun. So that's, again, conjecture on my part.
Did you say about how far Sergeant Becker was from the guy?
Well, it's going to be, I'm going to get, I'm going to call on some guys that are better at measures than me, 100 feet maybe?
Yeah, I mean, give or take 100 feet or more. So that's basically from one end of the building to the other end of the building.
Is this Sergeant Becker's first administratively even officer-involved shooting?
Yes.
And when you say read rifle, is that AR-15?
Correct. 223 caliber.
Yeah.
So, and 100 feet was the distance from the sergeant to the.
Yeah, it's going to be approximately.
Approximately,
Yeah,
yeah.
if you just-
One end of the building to the other.
Okay. And was he the only one, sorry if I already said this, was he the only one in the casino at that time?
The officer?
Yeah.
No, he had at least one more with him, but that officer was behind. Again, you got to understand the layout of this building. You have your entry doors, and then there's a second doorway, which is relatively narrow. And so you have one officer who is on that doorway with the vision, and the other officer is basically stacked in behind.
Okay. He was the first one.
Yeah, Sergeant Becker was the first one, and he had the patrol rifle. You had the second officer, and I'm not sure what he was armed with, but basically he didn't see that I know of, and was behind Becker. And then everybody else that came shortly thereafter were directed to handle the outside. There was an exit door on the east, and then on the outside chance of breaking out a window and fleeing to the north, we had people on that end as well. But 2 people in the casino when this incident unfolded.
It sounds like it was a fairly quick. In other words, do you know much time from when the officers entered? So.
Yeah, and generally these things are. You don't have a lot of time to react. I don't know what how much time elapsed.
But he did clearly tell the man to drop the weapon before the fire.
Yes, that's the information I have, is that we had clear, concise instructions to drop the weapon, corroborated by a witness inside. That did not happen. Sergeant felt people were at risk, and he engaged.
You said that he was reaching for something, officer, the sergeant figured it was the gun. Do you know if it was in fact the gun?
I can tell you that the gun was located on the floor in the vicinity where the suspect fell. The officer saw he was reaching for something and assumed that it was the gun that had been dislodged when the first shots hit him. So he followed up.
And he was, or did you say how far down was he?
The information I have is he was at a minimum in a crouch and at a maximum on all fours, moving, reaching towards something. Any other questions? Ask them now.
Steve, what happened at the very beginning that you went through that with everybody?
You caught up. It's pretty much, it was the 1800 Yellowstone which got us to that.
It was a domestic disturbance at 1800 Yellowstone.